Hello friends, welcome to Star Explainer. Tales of Herding Gods Part 349 and 350 explains based on novel. So let's start explanation. The dragon Qin was startled to hear this, and the voice sounded familiar too. Despite that, he didn't dare to let down his guard, immediately transforming himself, with a jolt of his body into the form of a sturdy-looking youth with a Qin head and a human body. However, he had transformed too quickly and forgotten that Qin Mu was still on his back. Qin Mu fell off with his limbs tangled, though the dragon Qin quickly caught him and laid him over his shoulder, looking behind the moonlight with caution. Today was the 7th day of the month. The moon formation usually became a crescent moon on this day, and the rest of the formation would be hidden by the shadows. The formation was very big and wide, spanning hundreds of miles. The portion blocked by the shadows didn't actually disappear, the formation continued to be in motion, and they were only hidden out of sight. The formation resembled a moon palace. A palace within the moon was truly a beautiful sight, and very pleasant to look at. The one who controls the moon in the sky map is definitely a beautiful lady. The dragon Qin stuck his head out of the shadows only to see that the moonlight was flowing down from where the damage was, resembling a stream of water. Within the moon was a woman sitting on the peak of the crescent. She was looking towards them as she blinked her eyes. "It's her?" The dragon Qin was slightly shocked. On his shoulder, Qin Mu was like a marionette without strings. He slid off his shoulder with limp limbs, and his head was bent in a crooked manner. The dragon Qin hurriedly caught hold of Qin Mu. The woman on the crescent moon walked over and asked in an astonished tone, "What happened to him?" "Cult Master is injured." The dragon Qin continued, "His injuries are very serious, but there shouldn't be a huge problem." "Cult Master, wake up." He shook Qin Mu. Qin Mu's head was shaken about like a rattledrum, and he immediately opened his eyes. Qin Mu looked at the woman with semi-consciousness. He felt that she was a familiar face, but he couldn't recall who she was. "Why are you here?" he mumbled before he drifted back into unconsciousness. "Look, it's not a big problem," the dragon Qin said confidently. The woman was, however, very worried. Sending them into the moon palace, she said, "I have just cleaned up the place, you can recuperate here." The dragon Qin settled Qin Mu down. After diagnosing Qin Mu's injuries, the woman was silent briefly before she went to refine pills and brew medicine for him. The dragon Qin went forwards, laughing. "Back then, you didn't know anything, yet now you can refine pills and brew medicine already." The woman smiled. "After you all left, I had to do everything by myself. At that time, I was still very young, I had to learn everything. It's only natural that I can do all these things after learning so much." The dragon Qin thought for a while, replying, "Back then, it really felt like a dream. Cult Master, Grandmaster, the chest, and I had so unexpectedly ended up at 100 Prosperities City. We then disappeared at daybreak. What we went through that night was, however, so strange that one would never be able to forget it." The woman turned her head to look at Qin Mu, who was sleeping soundly on the bed. She revealed a gentle smile. "It's true. The tens of thousands of years after, I have awoken from my nightmares countless times. Thinking back on that night's experience, it gave me the courage to continue living." Qin Mu could hear the familiar voice by his ear. He had wanted to open his eyes a few times, but because he was too heavily injured and his origin had suffered damage, he fell back into unconsciousness again. He had already pulled through the worst, it was mainly that Celestial Venerable Yu was too powerful. In the fight against Qin Mu, he had executed his own ultimate art of entering the path, executing from Tao 1 to Tao 28. The 28 continuous great divine arts of entering the path had forced Qin Mu to give it all he had. After exerting his all in the fight, Qin Mu was almost burned out. He had no other choice but to utilize his origin power, using the Anusrava creation, mysterious scripture, and 3 primordial spirit undying God consciousness, to mend his corporeal body and primordial spirit. This led to even greater exhaustion in his body. Now, he was drifting in and out of consciousness. He felt bitterness in his mouth, and it seemed like someone was feeding him medicine. The spirit medicine entered his throat and turned into a hot stream that flowed into his abdominal cavity. It started to surge around inside of him, flowing into his limbs and his bones. He opened his eyes and could faintly see a familiar-looking woman opening her mouth and spitting out a spirit bead. The spirit bead spun around him, and it made his primordial spirit and damaged divine treasures feel an indescribable comfort. Qin Mu drowsily fell back asleep. By his ear were the sounds of the woman and the dragon Qin having a conversation. It seemed that the dragon Qin and the woman were very familiar with each other. After an unknown period of time, the voices of other people reached Qin Mu's ears. They sounded like woodcutter, or heavenly teacher Zishi, and it also sounded like Dieu, and the others were there. He couldn't hear what they were saying, then it quieted down. Qin Mu was asleep. In his dreams, he felt like he had returned to the days of his childhood. Time seemed to be reversing, and he was back in the disabled elderly village, training diligently under the supervision of Old Ma, Butcher, and the others. Time reversed even further in his dreams. He was now a baby lying in a small basket. His hands and legs were stretched outwardly as he wailed, looking at Granny Sai and her outstretched arms with his bright eyes. Granny Sai was very ugly, yet her gaze was gentle as she carried him out of the basket. Beside her was a stone statue, and beside it was a similarly gentle-looking old Ma. The scene in his dream retreated, and time seemed to have reversed again, though he was still in the basket. He saw a girl who was carrying a basket, and was fearfully hiding in the raging river from the gods and devils chasing after her. The massive black water rolled up everything. Qin Mu looked at that girl from inside his basket. She was fighting against the gods and devils with all her might, protecting him. She was covered in wounds and was thoroughly exhausted. Aunt Pinga. The swaddled baby raised his short little arms, trying to touch her face, yet he couldn't reach her. Qin Mu had never found the memories of him leaving Yudu and being left in the great ruins. He was too young. Earth Count had sealed him, and then his mother handed him to Aunt Pinga, who had escorted him out of Yudu and into the great ruins. Aunt Pinga had died in the river to protect him, and Granny Sai had saved him when the darkness arrived. This memory was a blank to him, yet in this dream, he could actually faintly remember it. In the darkness, the black waters of the raging river surged and shrouded them. There were vicious-looking gods and devils chasing after them in the water and on both sides of the river. Aunt Pinga's injuries were getting worse, and it was difficult for her to protect him anymore. At this moment, the Qin Mu in the dream recalled a snow-white fog moving towards them. Aunt Pinga carried the basket and dashed into the fog with unsteady movement. The pursuers too ran into the fog. When the fog dissipated, there was a radiant sun in the sky. The sunlight shone so brilliantly that the swaddled baby shut his eyes and hid his face inside the cloth. Aunt Pinga had blood flowing out of her mouth as she continued to run unsteadily. She covered the basket with her palm, humming a folk song to coax the baby to sleep. Tall reed, long reed, playing hide-and-seek in the reed marshes. How many powerful and famous people were once the cowherds of the past. Tall reed, long reed, looking at each other across mountains and across seas. On this side of the reed is the hometown, on the other side of the reed is the sea. Tall reed, long reed, weaving by the reed marshes. When the weave is done, it is rolled into my bag, it accompanies me on my journey thus on to afar. Tall reed, long reed, the reed flute tune is melodious. The cowherds are in a distant land, always on the minds of their father and mother. Qin Mu listened to it in a daze, wanting to sing along. However, in the dream, he was just a baby of 2 to 3 months old, so he wasn't able to. The pursuers were on their tails, the gods and devils vicious and fierce. At the source of the raging river, in her despair, Aunt Pinga saw a woman washing her sword by the river. Qin Mu saw that the sword-washing woman had a familiar face. She looked like the girl who was feeding him medicine. Aunt Pinga asked for help, and the woman pulled out her sword. The sword was like a dragon dancing in the air. It could enrapture an entire city and be lauded in 9 prefectures. It was a familiar sword light. The sword techniques were evolved from Qin Mu's sword techniques, and it carried the essence and spirit that protected ordinary people in the apocalypse. What is his name? The sword-washing woman came to Aunt Pinga's side, looking at the baby inside the basket. His name is Qin Fengqing. Aunt Pinga looked at the baby in the basket, with a gentle gaze, as blood spilled out from the corners of her mouth. I have to send him to a safe place. I cannot let those gods and devils harm him. But I can't go on anymore. I wish to entrust him to you. The sword-washing woman shook her head. My name is Bai Chua. I am one of the remaining survivors of High Emperor. I am hiding from the pursuits of my enemies, and have already killed a group of pursuers. Leaving him to me will only endanger him further. I can protect you for some time, but it cannot be for too long. They moved along the river, the radiant sun hung in the skies to the west. Aunt Pinga hummed a nursery rhyme, as the sword-washing woman listened on quietly. After walking for an unknown distance, the sound of the nursery rhyme suddenly stopped. The sword-washing woman looked towards Aunt Pinga. She had already stopped breathing, and her eyes were lifeless. She continued to walk along the river carrying the basket as a walking corpse. The extremely strong attachment allowed her to continue moving forwards, to stubbornly continue to find a safe place for this swaddled baby, and to find someone she could entrust him to. The sword-washing woman was in a daze, yet she didn't take the basket away from Aunt Pinga's arms. She wasn't someone who should be entrusted with the baby. She could only protect this stubborn corpse, protecting her until she found someone. She hummed the nursery rhyme that the girl had hummed before she died. Tall reed, long reed, playing hide-and-seek in the reed marshes. How many powerful and famous people were once the cowherds of the past. Aunt Pinga's corpse followed the song and walked forwards with a smile on her face. They continued along the river, and she didn't stop humming. Finally, the skies started to dull, and the darkness was about to arrive. Tall reed, long reed, the reed flute tune is melodious. The cowherds are in a distant land, always on the minds of their father and mother. The sword-washing woman sang the nursery rhyme as darkness and fog surged forward, drowning Aunt Pinga behind her. The sword-washing woman walked into the fog, watching as Aunt Pinga sank into the waters. She was still holding the basket up high. The river gushed and carried them downstream. Don't go outside when it's dark. In the far distance, a voice could be heard from the village by the river. Everyone, listen. A child is crying outside. Impossible. You must be hearing things. There really is a baby crying. In the fog, the sword-washing woman watched as a hunchback old woman carried the baby out of the basket, before she gradually retreated. I've used the Boundless Calamity Sutra, entering the path through dreams to help him trace his origin and preserve his soul. At present, his life is no longer in danger. Within the Qin word land, the old Buddha, who had always been asleep, had landed suddenly, speaking to Heaven Duke, Earth Count, and the others. I originally intended to impart my Boundless Calamity Sutra to him, but he didn't have the fate for it. At present, helping him to enter the path through dreams within his dream, and through remembering his past, his comprehending of my Boundless Calamity Sutra, is only a matter of time. Heaven Duke replied, fortunately, old Buddha woke up in time. Otherwise, even if he survived, I fear he may have suffered great losses to his cultivation. At this very moment, Qin Mu gradually woke up, and a familiar nursery rhyme could be heard by his ear. Tall reed, long reed, the reed catkins resemble snow. The reed knows best of the violent winds, the reed knows best of the raging rain. He struggled to get out of bed, following the sound of the song and walking outside. The song made him feel like he had returned to his days as a cowherd. By the reed catkins, the sound of the reed flute was clear and melodious, and the snow-white reed catkins fluttered about in the wind. He walked outside. The moonlight was brilliant, and a familiar-looking girl sat in the moon palace, humming the nursery rhyme as she looked down at the mountains and rivers of eternal peace. She turned her head around, giving him a peaceful and shy smile. Seeing her smile, Qin Mu felt like his heart had melted. It had melted in those days under the radiant sunlight, by the reed marshes along the river, where the snow-white reed catkins fluttered and the cowherd sat on his cow as the cow walked slowly by the riverside. That day, there was a strange melody that echoed in his head. He wanted to hum it, to sing it out, yet he was not able to. He had felt that the tune was so familiar, so dear, yet he couldn't seem to recall it. At this moment, he remembered that nursery rhyme. When he was swaddled in the basket, he had heard the nursery rhyme, he had heard this voice. He walked to the side of the girl who was humming the nursery rhyme, that was familiar to him yet one that he couldn't recall, and he sat down with a smile. It's been a long time since we last met. Do you still remember that baby called Qin Fengqing in the basket? I am him. Bai Chua looked at him, an expression of astonishment slowly appearing on her face, though it soon became a smile. Do you still remember that girl who sat atop the chest? I remember. Qin Mu felt a burning sensation in his chest, but he couldn't tell if it was because his injuries weren't healed yet, or if there was some weird emotions acting up within him. Bai Chua hugged her knees with both hands, her body sitting upright, as she looked down at the sight below with a dazed expression. Eternal peace is really beautiful. Qin Mu looked downwards and saw tens of thousands of lit-up homes. On the vast land, amongst the mountains and rivers, there were tiny specks of lights around the city. Where there were lights, there were people. Even as eternal peace was undergoing dramatic change, these tenacious people were still trying their best to survive. There was a different sort of beauty felt, as he sat within the moon palace to look out at the mortal world. The high and mighty celestial heavens, which had eternal day, would never be able to enjoy the beauty of the shadows, and they wouldn't be able to see the hope within the hearts of the people who lit up lanterns in the dark. The moonlight shone brightly, and the moon formation in the sky map had opened up again, and was soon to become a full moon. Qin Mu felt that he must have slept for at least 5 or 6 days. What brings you here? He looked sideways at the face of the girl beside him and asked. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor bumped into me, and we discussed swords for a few days. Then I heard that a girl named Sai Yinxiang had sent out people to look around for the 4 great heavenly teachers, and 4 great heavenly kings of founding emperor, saying that son of Qin was in trouble and thus wanted them to go to the northern heavens to help. Bai Chua continued, therefore, I hurried over here first, intending to enter the palace of Mahakala through the sky map. I had just cleaned out the gods from the extraterritorial celestial heavens in the sky map, when Fatty Dragon brought you over. Qin Mu came to a sudden realization and laughed. Sneaking into the palace of Mahakala from the sky map, and even attacking Mahakala from his blind side, truly brilliant ideas. It would be able to avoid his senses. Bai Chua smiled. Yes, indeed. When you were unconscious, when Tiange, Han Tang, Yang Yunxi, and the others all came searching. They also entered through the sky map. 3 of the 4 great heavenly teachers of founding emperor also came by. Han Tang wanted to tear open a hole in the sky map, and send a fishing line into the palace of Mahakala to fish you out. Han Tang was the name of heavenly teacher fisherman, while Yang Yunxi was heavenly teacher Zixi name, though Yang Yinshi was the name she only used when she was dressed as a female. Heavenly Teacher Fisherman claimed that his hooks never went out for naught, so he may really have been able to fish Qin Mu up. Yang Yinshi intended to set up a formation to attack Mahakala from his blind side, but when Tiange said that Eternal Peace and Mahakala didn't have any grudges between them, and that there was a possibility for a neutral relationship, Bai Chua smiled. They all care about you a lot and only left when they saw that you were out of danger. How are your injuries? Qin Mu felt a warmth in his heart. Speaking of which, it's strange. When I woke up, all my injuries were healed. I had damaged my origin and initially expected that I would need to recuperate for a few years before I could cultivate to my peak. What spirit medicine did you feed me? He was very puzzled, as damaging his origin meant that his injuries were extremely serious. Even if he was a grandmaster in the art of healing, he would have to search for rare spirit medicine and slowly nurse his body into recovery. Even so, he would require at least a few years to replenish the deficiency in his body. Bai Chua had fed him medicine and used the dragon bead to condition his primordial spirit, which led him to assume that it was the effect of her spirit medicine. The spirit medicines that I gave you weren't anything special, they just helped to keep you alive and weren't able to treat the root of your injuries. However, I realized that while you were asleep, your wounds slowly healed by themselves. I'm very puzzled as well. Bai Chua pondered over it. While you were unconscious, when Tiange and the others came and sensed that you were performing self-recovery. When Tiange mentioned that a dharma was working in strange ways within your body, and it was as though it had made you relive your life. But where this dharma came from, he wasn't too sure. I wasn't able to detect its origins either. Qin Mu felt a slight jolt in his heart. It was like he had relived his life, and then all his injuries had healed. Even his origin had returned to its peak condition. This technique seemed to be related to Brahma Buddha's way of entering the path through dreams. Could it be that he had cultivated Brahma Buddha's Emperor's Throne's true scriptures in his sleep? But he had never learned this technique before. Back then, Brahma Buddha had told him that there was a Buddha within his Qin word land that contained his Emperor's Throne true scriptures, but that it would require Qin Mu's own comprehension to be able to learn it. However, the Qin word land had always been dominated by his brother Qin Fengqing, so the time he had spent in there wasn't long. Thus, he didn't have the opportunity to comprehend it. So when exactly did he learn it? Without learning it or comprehending it, he had obtained this Emperor's Throne technique. It was all too strange. Suddenly, Bai Chua stood up and stretched her hand towards him with a beautiful smile. Do you want to see the real galaxy? Qin Mu stared at her blankly before reaching his hand out, holding her hand. Bai Chua held onto his hand and flew about the sky map, flying away from the moon. She smiled and said, the astronomical phenomena within the sky map are fake, they are all formations. However, behind the sky map lies the real galaxy. I know of a hole in the sky map. If you go out from there, then you will be able to see the true galaxy. Qin Mu couldn't help but follow her. Turning his head around to look, he saw that within the moonlight in front of the moon palace, the dragon Qilin, who had dozed off by a pillar, had also now stood up to look towards them, seemingly wanting to run over to see the real galaxy as well. Qin Mu gave him a fierce look, and the dragon Qilin quickly stopped in his tracks, lying back down and continuing his nap. Qin Mu revealed a smile as the girl held onto his hand as they roamed the sky map together. They flew by the galaxy of the sky map. The stars were formed by various complicated formations, and their structure was extremely complex. The gods who were here were already eradicated by Bai Chua, and there was no one guarding the formations now. Although the galaxy was fake, flying through it as the brilliant starlight spilled all around them was still very romantic. When Tiange said that he was going to ask Emperor Yangfeng to send some scholars, who were skilled in algebra, to come and maintain the workings of the sky map, Bai Chua brought him through the galaxy. Over there is the sun within the sky map. Within the sky map, during the day, the stars will dull, and there will be no light in the galaxy. Only the sun will radiate light. However, when night comes, the sun will extinguish. Qin Mu looked in the direction she was pointing. The sun's formation had already stopped its work at this time. It was a circular formation in the form of a teleportation door. The insides of the formation were empty except for a sun palace within. As he had guessed, the formation borrowed the rays of the real sun in order to give off light and heat. The hole in the sky map is over here. Bai Chua arrived at the sun palace, bringing him into the palace. She smiled and said, however, this hole will only appear when the sun formation is lit up. Then we will be able to fly out of it to see the real galaxy. Qin Mu blinked, replying, it's night in eternal peace now. Bai Chua gave a sound of acknowledgement. When we light up the sun, the moon and the sun will appear in the night sky at the same time, Qin Mu continued. Bai Chua acknowledged this with an expression of pity on her face. Qin Mu broke out into a wide smile. Then let's do it. Bai Chua whooped with joy, sprinting to the center of the palace, where there was a huge scarlet-red cloth, made out of an unknown material. There were 3 golden crow images embroidered on it, and there was something below holding up the huge cloth. Bai Chua tugged off the cloth with her might, revealing a stand. On the stand was a palm imprint formed by an exquisite rune pattern. She pressed her palm on the pattern, looking to Qin Mu with some hesitation. Are we really lighting up the sun? Will it be too shocking? Qin Mu laughed. The citizens of eternal peace are long used to this. If we're talking about shocking events, a sun appearing in the night sky cannot be compared to the likes of the seal of the primordial realm being broken through. These past few years, the citizens of eternal peace have witnessed the explosion of natural disasters, the transformation of the surging river into the celestial river, the numerous revivals of gods and devils, and the appearances of heavens within the sky. Their ability to withstand changes is way stronger than we have imagined. Bai Chua was relieved. She worked her vital qi, and there was a buzz from the stand. Following that, the buzzing sound continued to flow around them along the ground. Very soon, the formation runes outside the Sun Palace lit up, and the runes turned a crimson red as the formation started to spin and extended out in all 4 directions. At this time, eternal peace hadn't entered the deep of the night. There were still many homes lit up with lanterns. In the cities, the lights were even brighter, and there were still people wandering around the night markets. However, the sun in the sky suddenly rose without warning, hanging high up and dissipating the night sky in a short instant. That wasn't all, the moon remained in the sky, and the radiance of the moon was actually not all that inferior compared to the sun. It was an extremely dazzling sight. The citizens of eternal peace were all in shock, and even the gods, devils, and half-gods of Yuanju were astonished by this sight. Countless people raised their heads to look up at the sky in a daze. Within the Sun Palace, Bai Chua gripped Qin Mu's hand and sprinted off, her laughter ringing out from ahead. Quick! Let's get out of here before the gods and devils come looking. Qin Mu's heart was palpitating. He followed her to the center of the sun formation, where there was a huge black spot that was incredibly unpleasant to look at. Bai Chua grabbed him and leaped into the center of the black spot. Her clothes flipped about and flapped onto Qin Mu's face. Qin Mu raised his free hand to push her skirt and pockets out of his face, and he saw that they had already jumped out of the sun formation and the sky map, and they were out of the fake astrological phenomena. They were now floating about in the boundless starry skies of the universe. Behind them was the sky map of an unknown length and distance, and in front of them, there was an enormous fireball floating in the incredibly silent universe. It was incomparably colossal beyond imagination. Standing before this sun, they were as small and insignificant as ants. Bai Chua suddenly grabbed him and took flight. As quick as a flickering shadow, and with unimaginable speed, she flew upwards. Raising a hand and pointing towards a direction, she laughed and said, "Look there." Qin Mu followed the direction of her finger, and saw the numerous heavens looking like gems mounted on the skies beyond the primordial realm. Within the colossal gems, there were sun, moon, and stars, resembling the innumerous bright spots beset within the gems, flickering before their eyes. They flew past the outside of these enormous gems, the world barriers like an invisible thin film that gently bounced them off when they were too close. Bai Chua borrowed the momentum from the world barriers to allow herself to speed up, taking Qin Mu to roam about the void. They flew away from the real sun, but Qin Mu raised his head and saw another sun. It was dull and radiating a dull red glow. Above this sun, he saw yet another dull red sun. Over there was the 33 heavens of founding emperor. Bai Chua continued to bring him about. Founding emperor had built 33 worlds here, but these heavens have already been annihilated. She brought Qin Mu past the first extinguished sun, and going around it, they saw the colossal galaxy. "That's the eye of heaven, Duke, he should be able to see us." Bai Chua waved excitedly towards that galaxy lump. Qin Mu also waved excitedly at it. He was so exhilarated his face was red. Within the Qin word land, the clone of Heaven Duke snorted, and he turned to Lava Earth Count. "I can see this rascal already, he looks pleased as punch." Lava Earth Count instead looked towards the Little Earth Count, who was excitedly sticking his head into the slaughter cauldron with his bottom sticking out, replying, "Is he as pleased as him?" Qin Fengqing was systematically counting his spoils of war inside the cauldron, and didn't hear what they were talking about. Great Sun Sovereign flapped his wings and got up. Lying atop the Qin word land, his 3 claws gripped onto the top of the sky like a huge bat lying on the rooftop, as he borrowed Qin Mu's line of vision to look at the outside world greedily. "The brightest sun just now, it's where I was born. It's Yuanju's only godly sun." Great Sun Sovereign continued to mumble, "Where I was born, the first and sharpest cry of the crow. I still remember running across the sky as I pulled the sun along." Suddenly, before his eyes was darkness. Qin Mu had taken out the willow leaf and covered up his third eye, so he was no longer able to see the outside sights. "Jerk, remove it quickly." Great Sun Sovereign continued to yell, "I want to see my hometown." Crimson Emperor's consciousness pulled him down. "He's out there flirting, why are you trying to be an extra? We've barely managed to have some footing here, and we're borrowing shelter inside here. You should stop being so demanding." Great Sun Sovereign stuck his head back. "You are borrowing shelter, while I am a prisoner here. We're not the same. Say, what do you think they are doing right now that they can't let us see?" When Qin Mu and Bai Chua flew back from the outer skies, the sun had already extinguished. The sun in the sky map was very punctual. Although there was no one controlling it, every 12 hours, the formation would automatically stop its operations. By the time Qin Mu and Bai Chua returned, the moon had extinguished too. Even the hundreds and thousands of stars that formed the galaxy in the sky map had all extinguished at this time. These stars and the moon were like the sun, every day, they would follow the cycle of lighting up and extinguishing once a day. Qin Mu and Bai Chua had opened the sun formation carelessly, resulting in the simultaneous emergence of the sun and the moon and thus messing up its cycle of lighting up and extinguishing. Right now, the sun and moon were both extinguished. Bai Chua brought Qin Mu and flew by the galaxy with rapid speed, her robes fluttering as they swept towards the galaxy and lit it all up. The citizens of eternal peace, as well as the gods, devils, and half-gods of Yuanju, once again witnessed an incomparably peculiar sight. The sky was filled with darkness. It was supposed to be daytime now, and the sun was supposed to rise and shine brilliantly on them. However, the sun was missing, and there wasn't even a single star. Yet, At this very moment, in the dark sky, there were suddenly countless dots of starlight emerging from the galaxy in the south. The starlight seemed to bear peculiar magical power, and the stars lit up consecutively from the south to the north. It was truly a mesmerizing sight. The stars in the skies have gone mad. Everyone shook their heads. First it was the sun emerging in the middle of the night, now it's complete darkness in the day. When unnatural events happen, there must be demons around. It's probably the result of demons making trouble up in the sky. Qin Mu and Bai Chua fiddled with the galaxy along the sky map, activating the formations. The two of them joyfully flew rapidly, lighting up the galaxy all the way from south to north. Normally, the gods who guarded the sky map would never have completely lit up the whole galaxy, at most lighting up a few thousand starlight formations. Yet right now, Qin Mu and Bai Chua had lit up the entire galaxy in one go. It was inexplicably extravagant. After the entire galaxy was lit up, the strip of brilliant light was like a vast stream, or river that could radiate light, stretching from south to north. Although it was a fake astronomical phenomenon, it still had a magnificent beauty that was out of this world. Suddenly, the moon in the sky was lit up again, and the moonlight shone radiantly. It was the 15th of the month, and the moon was perfectly round. The citizens and half-gods of eternal peace wore expressions of puzzlement. The god in charge of the moon up in the sky seemed to be muddle-headed. The moon had only just lit up, and then there seemed to be someone tugging on a curtain on the moon, slowly covering up half of the moon. The god in charge of the moon seemed to then recall that it was the 15th today, and he slowly pulled off the curtain again. The full moon once again appeared before the eyes of the countless astonished citizens. In eternal peace, there were some people enjoying the cool air and drinking wine out in their yards. At this sight, the wine spilled out of the corners of their mouths. Similarly, biscuits fell out of the mouths of those who had been eating them. The biscuits still had imprints of their teeth. Wurg! A young child opened his mouth and wailed. Immediately after, his mother covered up his mouth. The young mother looked towards the strange moon that had suddenly emerged in the sky with caution, mumbling a string of things in her mouth. Sky map, moon palace. Qin Mu and Bai Chua sat before the palace, both hands supporting them on the ground as they dangled their feet freely and kept talking nonsense. The dragon Qin rolled his eyes quietly behind them, finding their conversation meaningless. However, this pair was very happy, feeling that every sentence that they said was very meaningful and caused ripples in their hearts. Just like Patriarch was at West Earth back then. The dragon Qilin's big head laid on the ground, and he stuck out a dragon claw to draw on the ground, drawing two little matchstick people holding hands. He thought to himself, in that period, Patriarch also suddenly seemed to have lost his brain. Even though the conversation was very dry, he acted like it was as sweet as honey. Actually, regardless of Qin Mu or Bai Chua, the fate between the two of them was already sufficiently strange. However, their thoughts were also sufficiently strange. In Bai Chua's heart, Qin Mu was the big brother, who had protected her and gave her hope on that night when calamity fell upon her. Even 40,000 years after Qin Mu left, she was still unable to forget his sturdy shoulders, unable to forget his powerful voice, and unable to forget his words and actions. However, in Qin Mu's heart, Bai Chua was the peerless female sword god of the High Emperor era. She wasn't only the sword-washing woman who had saved him at the source of the surging river, but she was also the one who had passed on the philosophy that human lives were greater than heaven to the founding emperor era. She was sufficiently resilient with exceptional wisdom. There were budding feelings between the two of them, yet they considered each other to be shoulders to lean on. If one could view the history of the 40,000 years as one image, then the two of them would definitely be pictured leaning on each other. It was just that one would be from 40,000 years ago, and the other would be from 40,000 years later. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had brought the scholars of Eternal Peace here, planning to take control over the sky map. There were also numerous half-god leaders who resided in eternal peace that had flown up into the skies, along with several powers of the heavens, who had flown there to search for the origin of the apparitions. Amongst them were also Taoists of clear sky heaven. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor's expression was very dark. This Imperial Preceptor had very strict standards for algebra. The sun and moon in the sky were originally already crooked and slanted, giving him a huge urge to shoot the sun down from the sky. It was just that he was occupied with eternal peace, and thus, he didn't have the luxury of time to think about the sky map. Now, the day and night were actually in disorder as well, making him truly unable to bear with it. The sky map was originally created by the Taoists of clear sky heaven, so now that the astronomical phenomena were in chaos, these Taoists also flew up into the skies, intending to fix the problem. There were more and more people in the sky map, though Yu Chenzi was the first to run into the moon palace. Qin Mu and Bai Chua hurriedly stood up. Bai Chua still had the identity of the High Emperor Sword God, representing North High Emperor, and even the likes of Founding Emperor, Woodcutter, and Dieyue were all her juniors. She was too embarrassed to face anyone, hurriedly leaving Qin Mu behind as she walked into the moon palace. Yu Chenzi didn't see her clearly, only noticing that it was a girl, and thus, he stuck his head into the palace to look around. Qin Mu stopped him, laughing. Yu Chenzi, how have you been at the Imperial Preceptor's? Did you give my letter of recommendation to him? Before Yu Chenzi could reply, Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor walked over. What letter of recommendation? Qin Mu turned around and laughed. I felt that Yu Chenzi was outstandingly intelligent, that he was a great talent. Therefore, I wrote a letter and asked him to give it to you. It was to recommend him for work in eternal peace, so that he may achieve great things there. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor was astonished. Dao friend Yu Chen, since you have a letter from my senior brother, why did you not take it out? Yu Chenzi laughed. To be able to get the admiration of the Imperial Preceptor, and hence be placed in an important position, why would I still need Cult Master Qin's letter of recommendation? Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor turned to Qin Mu. He came to find me, and we discussed the Tao for several days. I found him a great talent, and thus let him be in charge of the foreign affairs of eternal peace. He's in charge of negotiating with the various powers within the borders of eternal peace. Qin Mu was very happy for Yu Chenzi, and he smiled and said, with Yu Chenzi around, Imperial Preceptor can be more relaxed. Yu Chenzi looked around the moon palace, and Qin Mu's gaze wavered. Yu Chenzi, did the celestial heavens send someone here again to create the new sky map? I see that there are quite a few clear sky heaven Taoists here. Why don't you go and make some inquiries? Yu Chenzi glanced at him and left resentfully. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor said, Senior brother, the astronomical phenomena within the sky map was in chaos with day and night reversing. Would you know why this happened? He inspected the moon palace and continued, it looks like someone lives here. Qin Mu coughed. I only just escaped from Mahakala and came here. I don't know what happened. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor replied, a few days ago, upon hearing that you were trapped within the palace of Mahakala, the High Emperor Sword God was very concerned about you and came to find you. Did she manage to seek you out? Qin Mu was about to reply when suddenly, he saw Bai Chua walking over from another direction. She said, Little buddy Jiang, I intended to sneak into the palace of Mahakala from the sky map to save Cult Master Qin. The gods of this sky map were eradicated by me. It's just that the formations here are a little complex, so perhaps I unintentionally touched some formation that caused the chaos in the astrological phenomena. Now that I see that Cult Master Qin has returned unscathed, I am relieved. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor held her in high esteem, and he replied to her solemnly, it has been hard on Senior. I originally intended to clear the sky map as well, it was just that I lacked the time and energy to do so. He poked Qin Mu secretly, whispering, Senior brother, pay your respects. This is the High Emperor Sword God Senior. Qin Mu was stunned. In the early years, she guided Teacher Woodcutter and the other heavenly teachers. I heard from Teacher that she told founding Emperor of High Emperor's philosophy that human lives are greater than heaven, and also that she was a great help to the founding Emperor era. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor continued whispering, such a predecessor, having heard that you were in trouble and then taking the initiative to come to your rescue, must be greeted respectfully. Qin Mu had no choice but to earnestly greet Bai Chua with the respect given to a senior, though Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor still felt that Qin Mu hadn't paid enough respects to her for a first greeting. Bai Chua quickly said, you don't have to be so ceremonious. I don't really take etiquette very seriously. Even when Tienga doesn't pay his respects to me when he sees me. Senior is worthy of it. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor continued solemnly, when Teacher meets Senior, he must pay his respects too. Yu Chenzi flew over, slowing down gradually and landing before the Moon Palace. He looked at Bai Chua curiously and then looked inside the Moon Palace with a puzzled expression. Qin Mu coughed. Yu Chenzi, what did those from Clear Sky Heavens say? Is the Celestial Heavens still investigating the cause of death of the emissaries from the Celestial Heavens? Are they still going to create the new sky map? Yu Chenzi retracted his gaze, suppressing the questions in his heart. The Celestial Heavens really did send an expert from the Divine Constable camp to investigate the deaths of the emissaries of the Celestial Heavens. The Earth Dragon has already been arrested and escorted up to the God execution stage of the Celestial Heavens. Qin Mu's heart jumped. There was actually an expert in the Celestial Heavens Divine Constable camp who could take down the Earth Dragon. That Earth Dragon wasn't inferior to the powerful individuals of the Jade Capital Realm and Numinous Sky Realm, yet he was actually arrested by the Divine Constable camp and escorted to the God execution stage to receive death. How did the gods of the Divine Constable camp come to the lower bound? Qin Mu questioned. There are rumors that the Divine Constable camp has a unique treasure that can allow them to travel through the various worlds and hunt down criminals. Yu Chenzi continued, there are people who have seen that treasure and say it looks like 3 golden crows. The Divine Constable camp has sat on it to travel to the various worlds to investigate and handle cases. 3 golden crows. Could it be Great Sun Sovereign's corporeal body? Qin Mu was taken aback. Great Sun Sovereign was originally the head of the star gods and controlled the inescapable net. He was also the commander of the great heavenly cycle stars army of the celestial heavens, and he supervised the heavens. He was incredibly powerful. Could it be that after Great Sun Sovereign's death, his corporeal body was refined into a treasure and sent to the Divine Constable camp? Yu Chenzi continued, the celestial heavens also sent people down to supervise the forging of the new sky map. Clear Sky Heaven is in charge of designing the sky map, while the forging is left to the construction heaven. Qin Mu frowned. The construction heaven is. Yu Chenzi replied, founding objects and construction are the 2 great heavens under the celestial heavens that are in charge of forging artifacts and treasures. Within, the gods refine precious artifacts. It has some connections to the heavenly works god race of the founding emperor era. It's similar to the Heavenly Works Hall of Eternal Peace. The new sky map will definitely be forged to replace the old sky map, it cannot be avoided. Qin Mu's heart flickered slightly. What are the abilities of the construction heaven and founding objects heaven like? These 2 great heavens call themselves warring heavens. They have been forged into machines of war. Back then, founding Emperor's supreme brightness heaven was where the heavenly works god race resided. However, compared to these 2 great heavens, it's still slightly inferior. Even with millions of gods and devils along with the emperor's throne, it still may not be possible to destroy these heavens. Yu Chenzi continued, clear sky heaven constantly helped these two warring heavens design precious treasures. After 1,000,000 years of development, these two great heavens may possibly come alive, and become apocalyptic divine weapons with terrifying power beyond measure. Qin Mu and the others were speechless. The forces of the celestial heavens were too horrifying. Sakrabuddha was the heavenly worker of founding emperor, the god of war. However, it may not be possible for him alone to sneak into the construction heaven to damage the new sky map. Qin Mu couldn't help but worry as he thought, when the new sky map is created and hung up in the sky, eternal peace will be finished. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor suddenly spoke up, saying, Eternal Peace won't be the most worried about the creation of the new sky map. Instead, it will worry the two Mother Earths and the other powerful individuals of Yuanju like Mahakala most. Qin Mu's heart flickered slightly, as he nodded his head gently. The new sky map will only be hung in the sky when Mother Earth, Mahakala, and the like surrender or die. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor smiled. Because of this, we don't have to worry about the new sky map. Regarding this old sky map, Eternal Peace can still make use of it. It's just that there are no powerful individuals here to guard this treasure. Bai Chua smiled. I'm not used to the excitement of the lower bound, so I intend to stay in the Moon Palace in the sky map. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor hurriedly gave his thanks. Qin Mu showed a serious expression. I would like to consult High Emperor Sword God on some problems regarding sword techniques. I wonder if it's possible. Bai Chua was solemn as she said, I dare not use the term consult, but Cult Master can stay here for a few days, and we can discuss then. Qin Mu was overjoyed, and he followed her into the Moon Palace. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor and Yu Chenzi watched the two of them walk into the Moon Palace, only to see that Qin Mu had intended to hold the hand of High Emperor Sword God, but Bai Chua had slapped his hand away. Both of them exchanged glances. Within the Moon Palace, Qin Mu and Bai Chua were actually really having a discussion about sword techniques. Although Bai Chua's sword techniques were derived from Qin Mu's, after 40,000 years of skills polishing, her techniques had made drastic improvements based off Qin Mu's sword techniques foundations from back then. Back then when Qin Mu and Grandmaster returned to 40,000 years ago, in 100 Prosperities City, Qin Mu had demonstrated his sword techniques to Bai Chua, Bai Qingfu and the others. However, when the High Emperor era collapsed, out of the many who had witnessed Qin Mu's sword techniques, only Bai Chua had survived. After Qin Mu left, she had protected her people alone, searching for a place to allow the High Emperor era to continue to survive, enduring all the trials and tribulations by herself. Qin Mu's sword techniques had gradually evolved under her as she became a god who protected her citizens. She was like another first ancestor human emperor, their difference being that she had even more acute determination in pushing forward. Bai Chua's starting point was even lower. First ancestor human emperor Qin Mu was the descendant of the founding emperor. He had been given the most superior education since he was young, and he cultivated the most formidable techniques and divine art. In comparison, she was merely the daughter of the city lord of 100 Prosperities City, and she was not of the pure bloodline of the dragon race. The best divine art that she had learned was Qin Mu's sword technique, and the ancestral dragon supreme mystery technique that he had imparted her. However, back then, Qin Mu was not able to completely impart his sword techniques to her in time, and the ancestral dragon supreme mystery technique was also in bits and pieces. She could only rely on herself to figure it out, changing and improving the techniques. Although Qin Mu's shadow could still be seen in her sword techniques, the essential properties and the concept of the sword techniques had long strayed from Qin Mu's path. This was also what made Qin Mu admire and respect her. Only when the sword techniques encompass the spirit of an era can one enter the path. This type of entering the path is not from using the Emperor's Throne techniques, or relying on algebraic constructions and runes of ancient gods' great Tao, as Celestial Heaven's Celestial Venerable Yu had done. Entering the path using Emperor's Throne techniques relies on the cultivation of the founder. It brings limitless comprehension to the cultivators. Entering the path using constructed Great Tao runes is an opportune shortcut method that allows one to be able to execute the Great Tao divine art of the ancient gods. These two types are both shortcut methods. The true way of entering the path is when one has been influenced by the spirit of a great era, allowing their Tao heart to situate itself within the era, as their Tao heart pulsates along with it. Touched by its breath and pulse, the Tao heart will then be stimulated by worldly affairs, thus allowing one to enter the path. This type of entering the path is when one enters the mortal world. Entering the path through worldly affairs, that is the true way of entering the path. Village Chief's sword Tao is from waving his sword again and again through setbacks, as he commemorated the martyrs with a vast heart. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptors entered the path with reforms and a determination to push forwards. Butcher entered the path with an unyielding spirit that refused to bow to the heavens and the earth, or to accept defeat. He had pointed his knives to the heavens, and was one who believed in returning debts of gratitude and avenging vengeances. Qin Mu entered the path after being provoked by the first ancestor human emperor. He bore heavy burdens and responsibilities, but was powerless to do anything. With a furious strike in the battlefield of Supreme Emperor Heaven, he wanted to change the fate of humanity. In Bai Chua's case, she had entered the path using her sword to look after the safety of the people, protecting the common citizens and giving them hope and the will to live. Her sword Tao had stopped advancing when the High Emperor era had completely ended and after the common people were safe. It was only then, when there were no longer war and chaos, that the citizens from the High Emperor era had the chance to live and flourish. At that time, her sword Tao had reached the 27th levels of heavens in cultivation. The talents of the new generation, like the founding emperor, also started to rise from then, allowing for Bai Chua the High Emperor Sword God to finally be able to put down her heavy responsibilities. This was also the reason that in the tens of thousands of years that came after, her sword Tao was no longer able to improve any further. However, her sword techniques and philosophy had still influenced the founding emperor era that would last 20,000 years, and thereafter the eternal peace of 40,000 years later. In their discussion of sword techniques, Qin Mu had imparted to her the 18th sword form and 19th sword form that he had founded, and in return he had also learned her sword Tao great divine art. He was able to see the trials and tribulations that this girl had experienced, as well as her stubborn persistence, through her sword Tao great divine art. This time, Qin Mu imparted his sword techniques completely to her, also imparting the ancestral dragon supreme mystery technique in its entirety to her. The reason why this High Emperor Sword God Bai Chua was unable to cultivate to a higher realm was exactly because the ancestral dragon supreme mystery technique was lacking in parts. Now that she has the whole technique, even if it could not improve her attainments in the sword Tao, it would be able to allow her cultivation realm to advance further. You want to look for the ruins of Ens. Bai Chua heard Qin Mu mention the ruins of Ens. Thinking briefly, she continued, "Back then I led my clansmen into East Sea. At that time Yuanju had not been sealed yet. In an area in the sea I met a huge dragon. It sounds like the dragon count you mentioned. Since dragon count was there, then ruins of Ens should be nearby." Qin Mu's eyes lit up and he quickly inquired where she had met dragon count. Bai Chua drew a maritime geographical map for him. Dragon Count has a very bad temperament. He is a descendant of the ancient divine dragons. If you go there, you must be careful. Within the sky map, the scholars of eternal peace were very diligent, and they were like busy worker bees, patching up the damaged parts of the formation in the sky map, and shifting about the structure of the formation. The sky map was a precious artifact. An Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor wanted to reconstruct the whole of this artifact to make it a formation weapon for eternal peace. Eternal Peace Imperial Preceptor had also considered putting away the sky map, however, doing so would only speed up the forging of the new sky map by the celestial heavens. To eternal peace, this would be even more disadvantageous. Making use of the laziness of the celestial heavens, and letting eternal peace look even more harmless, this was what would benefit eternal peace instead. Qin Mu and Bai Chua too made their way out of the Moon Palace to help the scholars mend the sky map and improve the structure of the formation, spending their time fruitfully. This went on until that day when Qin Mu suddenly thought of Celestial Venerable Yu. Damn, I have left Brother Yu in River Tomb Academy for almost half a year. Qin Mu had no choice but to leave. Bai Chua stood before the Moon Palace and waved goodbye to him. Qin Mu stood on Dragon Chiline's head as Dragon Chiline sprinted towards the world below. He turned his head around to look. That girl was dancing with her sword under the brilliant moon. Qin Mu watched the girl dancing in the moon with a daze. He felt that Bai Chua's sword Dao that had been stagnant had seemed to suddenly have elevated again and had advanced further. The girl seemed to have found someone or something that was worth sacrificing her life to protect again, and thus her attainments in sword Dao had increased once again. Does she want to protect the eternal peace that had inherited the High Emperor's philosophy, or does she merely want to protect me? Qin Mu shook his head, breaking into laughter. She wants to protect eternal peace, that must be it. River Tomb Academy, with a black face, Qin Mu picked up Celestial Venerable Yu and Water Chiline, who had both become much fatter after being fed by Yang. In the span of a half year that Celestial Venerable Yu had followed Duke Wei, his voice had also become unusually louder. Qin Mu's ears rang from the vibrations of his voice. Qin Mu's expression darkened even more. He strictly forbade Yang from feeding Celestial Venerable Yu and Water Chiline anymore, and forced Celestial Venerable Yu to train insanely along the journey, not wasting any time to train away the flabs on his body. As for Water Chiline, Qin Mu left Dragon Chiline to train him. Regarding reducing flab from the body, Dragon Chiline knew his stuff well. Yang no longer had the chance to feed them, and thus she could only look after Qin Mu. Qin Mu bought some sunflower seeds for her, letting this girl peel them one by one to feed him. Does young master eat devil gods? Yang caught a devil god that was as big and sturdy as a mountain, trying to tempt him. Qin Mu shook his head. Yang was very disappointed, and she ate the devil god herself. She flew off and returned with a god, tempting him again. Does young master eat gods? Qin Mu shook his head. Yang burped after eating her fill. They reached Jade Capital Academy. Wang Muren's Jade Capital Academy was slightly inferior as compared to the other academies. Back then it was the most famous and the #1 sacred ground of eternal peace. It had fallen backwards, as it was too detached, and it had not been able to reform at the first moment, and had used the profound and long-lasting foundation of Little Jade Capital to attract scholars here. Yet, Qin Mu had met first ancestor human emperor here. Other than the first ancestor, the past human emperors had actually came here to be its directorate, and to teach the scholars. Little Jade Capital was originally a broken part of the celestial heavens of the founding emperor. It was of deep sentimental value to the first ancestor, and back then when he became dispirited, he had turned into a stone statue at this very place. Second ancestor, third ancestor, human emperor Qi Kang and the others were all the most outstanding geniuses since the 20,000 years after the destruction of the founding emperor. Now that they had revived and re-emerged, they were naturally even more formidable than they were back then. These human emperors had actually all reopened their celestial river divine treasure. Their abilities were truly extremely strong. Further, they continued to be the main forces of Fengju and thus drew many to Jade Capital Academy. First ancestor human emperor had also moved the Jade Brightness Palace collections over to Little Jade Capital, greatly increasing the progress of Jade Capital Academy. Qin Mu brought Celestial Venerable Yu here to seek knowledge. After more than a dozen days, he had finished learning all the results of the reforms while Celestial Venerable Yu had not, and thus he could only wait here for him. Human Emperor Qin, you seem to care a lot about this little fatty. Human Emperor Qin carelessly rubbed little fatty's chubby face, squeezing Celestial Venerable Yu's mouth into a flower shape, and he laughed. Could it be that you planned to groom him as the next generation's human emperor? Qin Mu's eyes lit up. He had not actually given thought to what he should plan for Celestial Venerable Yu. He merely did not want to disappoint Elder Messenger of Death. He wanted to groom Celestial Venerable Yu into an existence that was not inferior to his past life, and would once again become the Celestial Venerable who would astonish the world. However, Qin Mu could not possibly always take Celestial Venerable Yu along with him. Perhaps he could nurture Celestial Venerable Yu into becoming the next generation's human emperor. Each generation of the human emperor is more powerful than the previous one. Human Emperor Qikang smiled broadly. Do you think that in future he would be able to defeat you? Qin Mu modestly replied, our Hall of Human Emperors do have such a tradition. Brother Yu is also truly outstanding and extraordinary, he is way beyond me. However, I am the overlord body after all. Human Emperor Qikang sneered, leave the little fatty here, all of us old fellows will teach him together. I guarantee, he will be able to beat you the overlord body up, until you cry out for your father and your mother. Qin Mu burst out laughing and actually really left Celestial Venerable Yu there, instructing, don't teach him techniques, and don't teach him how to awaken the divine treasure. Whoever dares to teach him that, I will beat them up until they cry for their father and their mother. The past human emperors laughed coldly, and intended to teach this master-deceiving and ancestor-destroying rascal a lesson. Qin Mu hurriedly called for Dragon Qilin, taking Yang along, and flew off with a whoosh. Young master, where are we going? Yang saw that he was in high spirits, and couldn't help but ask with a smile. East Sea. Qin Mu pointed in the far east and exclaimed loudly. Yang asked curiously, have young master grew tired of eating the gods and devils of the land? Do you want to eat seafood? The gods and devils of the sea have a fishy stench. We are going to look for the ruins of Ens. Qin Mu laughed lengthily. We are going to search for the tracks of Heavenly Saint Cult's founding master, Big Senior Brother Wei Suifeng, and see what kind of secrets he had left behind in the ruins of Ens for me. Dragon Qilin sprinted joyfully towards the East Sea. When he reached the surface of the sea, they saw giant beasts trampling through the waves, frolicking about with joy. Months later, Dragon Qilin floated on the surface of the sea with his belly sticking up towards the sky. No matter how Qin Mu beat him, he refused to get up to continue the journey. Based on the maritime geographical map that Chua gave me, the place where she saw Dragon Count should be nearby. Qin Mu looked around his surroundings, matching it to his geographical map, yet still he didn't make any discoveries. He removed the willow leaf from the heart of his brow. Entering the Qin word land with his consciousness, he asked courteously, Heaven Duke, can you see me? After a short period, the clone of Heaven Duke replied, yes. What do you want to do again this time? Qin Mu hurriedly replied, may I trouble Heaven Duke to help me find the ruins of Ens? Heaven Duke glared at him. Qin Mu's expression remained unchanged. After another short while, Heaven Duke snorted coldly, the sea surface is very flat, there is no ruins of Ens here. Qin Mu was stumped. He turned to the Magma Earth Count, but Earth Count ignored him. He could only retract his consciousness. He opened up the gate of heaven influence behind him with a swoosh, and then waited outside the gate earnestly. After a long period of time, a small boat leisurely floated to a still by the gate with the elder messenger of death standing at the head of the boat. Celestial Venerable Yu, dare I ask the way to ruins of Ens? Qin Mu asked. The lamp in elder messenger of death's hand almost extinguished, and he shook his head silently. Qin Mu continued to press. Then what about Dragon Count Country? The lamp in Elder Messenger of Death's hand trembled, with the gate between them. He raised his hand and pointed in a direction. Thank you. Qin Mu replied politely, intending to shut the gate of heaven influence. Wait for a moment. Elder Messenger of Death stuck a hand through the gate. The lamp shone straight in Qin Mu's face. The expression of the elder standing behind the lamp was not very pleasant. You called me out just to ask for directions. Qin Mu nodded. The palm holding the lamp trembled slightly. The elder behind it was drawing long breaths, and he replied, forcing himself to be tolerant, on account that you are taking care of Celestial Venerable Yu. Where's Celestial Venerable Yu? Where did you dump Celestial Venerable Yu at? Part 349 and 350 end here. Thank you for watching.